but not yet. Anyway, first of all, I want to thank Mayor Capuzzi for chairing this meeting last week. I went to Washington, D.C. together with Don Ramsey and Commissioner Bob Stevenson from Davis County, and we talked to our congressional delegation about transportation and infrastructure. So we had actually had a good visit with all 6 of our delegation, and really positive meetings about ensuring that when we recommend projects, particularly those that are going to be in the competitive grant program under the federal infrastructure bill, that they'll write letters of support for those. So I feel good about that. So anyway, I'd like to know someone who has read the February 22nd or February 7th minutes would like to make a motion to approve them. We have a motion. Do we have a second? I see a second. Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, those are approved. Thank you. So next, I'd like to, I guess, have Justin Lee come up and talk to us about water, and I guess we have Brian Steed who's going to speak to us as well. So Justin, take it away.
Let's go this. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. We'll jump ahead here. So we talked about this a couple weeks ago, and we've talked about it the last few weeks, but secondary water metering, HB 242, this is the big bill, and we've been having a lot of discussions around it. So we've asked Brian Steed, the Director of Natural Resources, to come and talk to us and answer some questions about why we're doing this right now, what this looks like, and what room we may have for discussions or negotiations about this. So Brian, I'll have you come up. Feel free to ask Brian hard questions. He's a very smart guy, but also be nice to him because he's a good guy.
I like how the lights dim as I'm coming up. It's great. My name is Brian Steed. I'm the Executive Director of the Department of Natural Resources for the state. I've been in my job for almost 3 years now. For the last 1.5 years, I've done very little else besides talk water policy, so I feel welcome to be here. Let's talk secondary meters really briefly. One, the history of secondary water in Utah is a little unique to Utah. We had a bunch of agricultural lands which were eventually converted into municipal and industrial areas. The decision was made back in the day, often in the 50s and sometimes before that, to say, hey, we are going to just convert that untreated water into water that you can use outdoor. So as a policy perspective, that actually makes a lot of sense because then you don't have to run it through treatment, and that's great. It's worked pretty well for a very long time until I would say really within the last few years to where we're facing a lot more pressure on the water resources we have. What we have right now is a situation where we've got lots more people coming into the state, and we don't have a lot more water falling on the state. And as a result of that, when you project that out going into the future, that sets up a pretty dangerous situation where we have high demand and lowering supplies. And I don't know what's going to happen going forward with climate change and whatever else. What I can say is we've noticed over the last 20 years or so that we've had decreased water supply. And some of that has come in the form of rain and not snow, which means we don't capture it into our reservoirs. And when you look at what's happened over the last years, we've been in extreme drought. We actually have a situation that's a little scary. And I used to have a perfectly blonde, or actually perfectly red hair. Now it's all white because I've been worrying about this so much lately because ultimately we have certain systems in the state that are going to be very stressed. And so we have to really be more more mindful of the water that we're using and how we're using it. Secondary water is used almost exclusively outdoors on landscaping. About 2/3 of the water that we use, both treated and untreated water in the state for municipal industrial uses is used outdoors to maintain our landscaping. Turns out it's a bunch of water. If we were to just count secondary water per capita and an M&I is about 1/3 of the water used, okay, by people. So why we want to get ahead of that is because, well, when you get more people and more people using water, well, we have a problem because we're just not getting a lot more water that way. And why meter? It turns out that we are interested in having increased conservation. There's really a variety of ways to do that. We could do it by government mandate. You can say thou shalt not water. That's super popular, as you know, as folks who have been on the receiving end. Two, you're able to provide information. Information being, hey, how much water am I using? And it turns out just the supplying of information, going from unmetered to metered. If you look at Weber Basin in Utah, there's a 30% reduction in water use. If I extrapolate that over the 260 unmetered connections in Utah, that's equivalent of saving about an East Canyon reservoir worth of water per year, maybe even as high as Jordanelle Reservoir per year. And why, as a water guy, I like that is because that's the lowest cost water I'm going to get to put more water back in use in the system. And I understand that it's often problematic, and I understand that many of you are having an earful for it. And one of the major stumbling blocks that we've had on this is that going in and installing these meters retroactively is it becomes very expensive. And why we're pushing so hard this year to get this done is because we have all this ARPA funding that's sitting around. And so when you look at the cost of installing these meters statewide, it may be as high as $350 million. We're able to do a sizable chunk of that through ARPA funds, to where HB 242 actually envisions spending up to 70% of the cost of installation of those meters when they're put in using ARPA funds. That's a huge cost savings for your residents, and that's why we're pushing so hard. I understand there's a lot of questions about it, so I'm going to limit it to that. I would say this: the governor has been fully behind this. I understand that water metering is a controversial topic. I understand that there's a lot of different feelings on this, but I will say this as my closing argument before I take questions. We have to have more usable water in the state. We can develop more water, that's true, and that's an option, and we're actually exploring that very much, but the cost of developing new water is very, very, very high. And if there's not more water falling, filling new reservoirs is very hard. The lowest cost alternative that I can find, and I'm not the smartest guy, but I've thought about this a lot. The lowest cost water I can find is by metering and conserving better. And that's why we're pushing it so hard right now. And with that, I'll take any questions you got. Thanks.
So I just want to ask you, Brian.
Yes.
Get the mic here. I think one of the biggest questions that we've had with respect to this is whether this creates an unfunded mandate for municipalities and counties, and that's our concern, I guess. You know, the bill talks about funding 70% of the cost, but you know, where are we going to come up with the rest of that money?
I think it's an excellent question. Water is one of those unique things to where you can actually charge users of the water for that, or the bill also facilitates the ability to get loans through the state on how that works also. Listen, I understand it's costly. I understand it's problematic, but I'm going to ask you straight up, what's the alternative? If we don't do this, then we're going to have increased demand for water. We're going to run out of water, and we're just going to stop turning the tap off. That's the alternative that we'll have as a state. And that's going to cause you more political headaches, I promise, than increased cost.
Other questions?
Brian, my question is just the timing with everybody trying to do this and having to go through public bidding processes. And if you don't get good bids, have to go through that again. You know, the 2 years seems to be a really short time before you start getting, you know, reduced help from the state. Any way that could be lengthened like a year, so just to give people a chance to, cities that have to go through, you know, the best time probably to get bids for this summer, it's already passed.
So I totally appreciate that question. And let me be very clear, I'm not the sponsor of the bill. And I may not be able to say, yes, this can change. I have spoken with the sponsor, and there may be some ability to change it. The reasoning for that 2 years up front was to provide people the maximum incentive to use the ARPA dollars. The ARPA dollars are like the dews of the morning. Will they evaporate in 2026? If they're not spent, they go away. And so this gives an incentive to say, hey, it's time to do this now. And otherwise, we just don't have the financial resources to get it done like we would otherwise. And I think that was the incentive. Also understanding that this is going to be there are 260,000 meters. That's a lot of meters in the state. There is going to be some competition for those resources. And so understanding that you want to get in that queue early is why that 2 years was set up fast. Now, one of the things that's been discussed is kind of a review on how this is going in the future. I'm not talking to the sponsor about that, but I think it's certainly a reasonable request to say, hey, how is this going? And if there needs to be more time in the future to review that. What I can't guarantee, unfortunately, is additional funding, because I don't believe there'll ever be a time when the legislature is willing to pony up $220 million for water meters. Otherwise, I think the mandate will come, and that will be entirely borne by you and your customers. So.
I've got we've got two questions online. First, can the funds be used for installing metering, be used for changing landscaping instead?
Currently, no. This is a water metering bill. There are additional funds to change landscaping, but these funds were specific to metering.
Thank you. One more question. Would a city who went through the state for a state loan for meters in the last 2 years be eligible for some of the funding? Payson is going through Payson is going through this to get meters this spring. Sorry, I missed the question. Basically, yeah. If the city is getting a state loan already for metering, would they be eligible for this funding as well?
But I haven't looked into the specifics, and I would just encourage the fair city of Payson to contact us, because I just don't know how far they are in the process, right? And if they've already signed on that loan, it may be more difficult than if this is something anticipated.
Okay, thank you.
Just a couple of questions. One is that I learned yesterday that the game isn't over till it's over. All right. And right now, you know, you've got the House that is very supportive of this. It appears they're very supportive of what happens if the financial piece does not materialize after you go through the Senate. And that's the problem is that our obligation is tied to this money that's supposedly going to come our way. But what happens if the money doesn't come our way? And that's the first question I have. The second one is, why penalties? Why a time period? If you've got a carrot that is big enough, why do you need a stick on the other end? Why do we need to stick it to the small companies and the cities on the other end by putting a really, really quick end to the runway? So if we don't get that financing, that 2030 date is going to be a very difficult date. I'd love to see the financing tied to the bill. If the financing doesn't materialize.
So as to whether or not I can guarantee what the Senate does, I can't guarantee I'm going to wake up tomorrow. I wish I were able to do that. All of our conversations have indicated that, yes, they're willing to do that. In fact, I had a conversation this morning that I was reassured that the Senate's good to go on this current version of the bill. I don't know what will happen in the run up to that, but that was the information I was provided this morning. As for the penalty question, I think it's a fair one. And I am going to be as measured as I can be. I would love for this to be an incentives problem to where I could incentivize this and people would do it because it's the right thing to do. I do not have the confidence that will happen. And I've been told as many by these small producers, the very same that you're asking about, that we will not and we cannot and we won't. I don't know what else to do. And if I'm willing to pay 70% of something and that's not good enough, and hell, if I was able to pay 100%, I'm not sure that you have smaller companies willing to do it. I don't get the sense that it's a inducement problem. I get the sense that it becomes an unwilling problem. And if I could make more water happen in the state, I would happily do so. If I could do so at the cost of this, I would do so as well. I'm a pretty free market kind of guy. I don't like mandates. To be very, very honest, I don't know what else to do to get people's attention.
Just a question here. We've had some discussion here about a possible phasing where maybe it's critical to get the Great Salt Lake back to where it needs to be, and that's a key priority. In my mind, I'm wondering if in some of the rural areas, the water that is used there, if it doesn't just go into the aquifer and actually become part of a virtuous cycle of being used back again. And so didn't know if is the state has that been looked at? Are there some areas where we're not losing the water actually. It's actually still just, it's being used for agricultural or landscaping and it's ending back up in the aquifer. And so in those areas, maybe it's not as urgent of a need. And I don't know much about this topic, but that's the high level question.
So as for virtuous cycle, there are varying levels of virtuosity, I guess. And I would say this. Who here has mowed their lawn? I have. What do you get when you mow your lawn? You get grass clippings, right? Where do you think the water's gone in those grass clippings? It's been used in that grass, right? And when you mow it, who here has sold those grass clippings for money? I haven't either, because there's no market out there, because when you cut that grass, that's grown through the use of that water, and that water is lost to the system at that point, right? So it's not as if there is no cost to this. In fact, even on most porous properties that I know of, there's about 60% water loss when you spread it across the top of a landscape, right? And then you get 40% recharge, which I love. I love that recharge, but you're still having a fair amount of water loss. So it may not be the most virtuous of cycles. In terms of the rural or the sort of rural-urban divide, I would argue, yes, this has been by far more targeted, and the problem is by far bigger on those urban areas. If you're looking at where those areas have been most highly reliant on secondary meters, or I'm sorry, secondary systems, it's been Weber, Davis, Salt Lake, and probably Utah counties. And then Washington County would also rank relatively high. Other systems have been by far smaller water users. And so the question is whether this would be something we can maybe exempt the rurals. I think it's worth a discussion. The question is, though, are those water problems going away? And I would argue they are not. Every community in the state is growing, and those areas that have shut down from development first are those areas that are most rural in nature, just being honest. The two cities that shut down building permits last year were both rural cities, because those are the ones that didn't want to steal from the farmers nearby in order to water landscaping. I understand it's politically costly, totally get it, but I still think that we got to do hard things sometimes.
Brian, Mark Christensen with Saratoga Springs. We love metering. We're all over it. We've got it. We've implemented it. Our implementation started in about 2015, and it took about 3 years to get meters rolled out in our city. At the time, that was roughly 7,500 homes, and about 90% of those had meter sets already in place because we'd adopted a standard for that. So it was just simply putting meters in the ground. I share that with you because we think it's the amazing right thing to do. So we're fully supporting of it. Our concern is this: we just placed an order last month for meters to keep up with the 200 homes that we're adding each month that are getting occupancy. And we're out 6 months right now in getting that next shipment of meters. And while I love the idea of all my neighbors joining us in metering, I don't believe the supply chain can remotely handle the pressure that this is going to put onto it. And while I 100% support where this is going, I fear that we are being placed in a carrot stick situation, which I think is great. Thank you for the incentive. I just think it's going to be an impossible task for many people to be able to plan for the transition, because we spent about 18 months preparing for the transition. And then we spent 3 full summers implementing. It's going to be a big challenge. And that's with most of our meters. All you have to do is pull the lid on the meter box and put the meter in place. And we had a half a dozen contractors running around the city installing those meters. So this is a complex issue. And I fear that perhaps the desire to do the right thing is perhaps overshadowing the practical implementation of this. And so as a city that's implemented Spanish along with Weber Basin, I'm sure several of us would love to help with that. But my concern is we're setting up something that's probably going to fail, not because we won't try and not because it's not the right thing to do, but because it might be an unrealistic expectation on timing and the actual rollout. And so if there's any way we can communicate to the sponsor, our complete support, but at the same time, if we're 6 months out buying meters and we're implementing, it's going to cause some serious demands when another 280,000 meters need to get put out in that short of a period. So I'm just concerned that we're being placed in an unenviable position of failure. And so again, fully support it, just not sure how we're going to do it.
I appreciate that, and I'll certainly convey that to the sponsor. I will say that not all meters have that same lag. We've talked to other meter companies where I could get you meters within 2 weeks. And so it's something that, no, I would agree. I totally agree. But I think also to be advised that not everyone has those supply chain constraints. I think everyone will have supply chain constraints, but I don't think they're all the same.
I've got the mic. Brian Allen. So I'm part of a small, like 450 user secondary watering system. It's an old legacy system that's been around for longer than I've been alive. And that's a long time. That's like back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. So the problem that we're having is, one is it's a lot of work to get a meter in because none of it was built to accept a meter. So we've got to redo every connection. The other problem that we have a concern with in talking to one of the suppliers is that there was some intimation that the cost of these meters is going to go up dramatically once this bill passes because it's going to create a demand issue with a limited supply. And they're going to be able to, because we have to have the meter, they're going to be able to charge anything they want. It's kind of like what happens when you have a natural disaster. All of a sudden lumber goes from, $5 a 2x4 to $50 a 2x4. So we're creating a crisis because of the time frame, and there's going to be people profiteering from that. Is there anything in the bill to protect us from that or to protect that from happening?
In terms of controlling the price structure, that's currently not envisioned in the bill. It's certainly something I can talk to the sponsor about, though.
I mean, I would at least do something because I think there's a real opportunity for mischief here if we don't think that through carefully.
Yeah.
Because we're already having suppliers telling us we're not going to be able to get meters for at least a year, enough meters to do the project because the demand's already starting.
Yeah, got it. Thanks.
We're gonna have maybe 2 more questions and then we're gonna move on.
Hi, Brian. Gary Hill, Bountiful City, half acre lot, most of it's grass, so guilty as charged. I think for many of us on the Wasatch Front, and the sentiment I get in this room, and I could be wrong, but is that we're very aware and supportive of the need to do this. But I think the major concern really is just timing of being able to do it. If this were the only priority that many of us had to get done in 2 years, maybe we could do it. But in light of, all of the other needs. So really the question, and I understand your need is we've got to get people committed to doing this. I think many are. So I'm wondering if there isn't some way in the bill that cities, water districts can make enough of a commitment to qualify for the funding that doesn't require them to have the entire project done or the costs done in the time frame. Because to me, I think if that commitment is shown, that's what you're really asking for. It's getting it in and then committing to get it done. I know it'd have to be substantial enough to make sure the districts are seeing it through. But if there's any way that those that are the good partners here could make that commitment, if there's any way to work with a sponsor, we would be very, very grateful for that.
I appreciate that. The one thing I can't change, though, is those federal requirements that it's spent by 2026.
Well,
And that's the rub, that this money is guaranteed, the vast majority of it through ARPA funds.
and that would be the state's portion, but I think we all recognize that there's a lot more funding that's going to have to come to see this through for the vast majority. Even the money that the state's setting apart isn't enough to meet the demands of all of the systems that are going to have to. So we recognize that, and I just wonder if there isn't some way that cities that are good faith actors that want to get this in but simply can't, cannot be penalized. If there's some step that we can take to demonstrate that, yeah, we have every intention to do this, but not be penalized on the backside. Something to consider. I think many of us really want to do this. It's just a practical problem.
Can I ask a follow-up question? What would that time frame be then? I mean, from what, in your experience, what would that be? Because I've been working with certain small producers, right? Or small water systems, and they told me, well, 2050 is way too soon.
So a group of city managers, we had a very, I think, real conversation about this, and 2050 isn't either a practical number, but we think realistically 8 years realistically is the number.
Sure. And I think that's totally reasonable. And I think we're very close on that. Right?
Close, but not there. Close. If we can get there,
Right.
we would really like 8 to 10 would be awesome.
Okay.
And I think that's realistic and reasonable.
So, and on question on that, then on the funding side, how does that work?
Well,
Okay.
a lot of the funding is fungible. I mean, you can use it for other uses. I mean, we have ARPA funds too,
Right.
and all the cities are doing the same calculations of being able to use funds for one area and move them around. It's not a criticism. It's just, if we can work on it, we'd love to.
Sure. Absolutely. Thanks. Appreciate it. We're here all week, so.
Mark, did you have a comment on that one? Thank you, Brian. Appreciate taking all that time. Looks like we have one more person ready to talk, so we can jump ahead and circle back to motions.
I think our agenda may have been taken from us too, but I'd like to switch the topic to housing and introduce Representative Steve Waldrop. So thank you, Representative, for joining us today.
Before I officially introduce Representative Waldrop, Brian, thank you for joining. This was an excellent discussion, and obviously a lot's going to happen over the next 13 and a half business days on this issue, as well as on housing, land use, population growth in general. I think I've spent more time during the legislative session with Representative Waldrop than with any other legislator. For that, I apologize. And we still have 13 and a half more days to go. Representative Waldrop is the co-chair of the Commission on Housing Affordability, and I've referenced to this group that he spent 90 minutes with the League Board of Directors at the beginning of the session, talking about his objectives with the Commission on Housing Affordability, both in the short term this session, as well as in the long term. When I provide an update in a moment of where the different moving pieces are, I'll come back to that. But I wanted to publicly acknowledge and thank Representative Waldrop for his deliberative approach on housing policy, and also a very responsive approach where he has been taking arrows from all sides, but is also trying to find good public policy that makes a difference for the state of Utah, and has really treated local governments as a strong partner in this effort. So Representative Waldrop, I'll turn the time over to you. You can talk about whatever you
I'm
want.
looking at your list here.
Oh, just in general, I'll go through the specifics.
Okay. Thank you. And I have spent quite a bit of time with Cam and some others in the room here, and I appreciate that effort. And I'd say that meeting of the 90 minutes, I hope I spent at least as much time listening as I did talking. There's one thing I'm sure of, and that's that I know about this much. And so I'm an inch deep and a mile wide. And as I come into your world as the league, there's a sense, at least in my mind, I have to honor and respect the experience that you guys are bringing to the table and not impose my vision on other people and tell them how to do their jobs. I don't view that as my job in the legislature, as a legislator, to tell other people what to do for their job. I view it as I get information, I vet information, I look for solutions that will ultimately benefit the state as a whole. But that doesn't generally involve me telling other people how to do what they're supposed to be doing. There are other people who get to tell the mayors how to do their job. That's the voters. So that's been the approach I've taken, and we've had great discussions. I've talked with the good mayor here. We've had some time together, and what I'm trying to do in this legislation is bring this body in a collaborative way with the league, I'm too tall. Oh, yep. Is that any better? There we go. Like my Richard Dawson moment. Here we go. That's good. This is fine. So I know I could have knelt down, I guess, and made that work. So what I'm trying to do is be a facilitator between the league, between developers, between government entities and officials, and try to sit sort of in the middle of that and listen to all of these sides bring their perspectives to the table. And then from that gathering of all these different perspectives, try to come out with something that is good policy from the state standpoint, but that also recognizes the interests of each of these actors. And in that, inevitably, there's going to be wins and losses. Because sometimes, as much as we wish we could have everything be happy, happy, kumbaya, there are diametrically opposed issues where there's just, it's either this or it's that. And those happen sometimes. And so in that case, we have to balance those this or that's against a different this or that and make sure that, that there's a consensus that everybody is getting something that they want and everybody is losing something that they wish they had. And that's sort of the skill of Cameron and the league. They're good at that, keeping me on track as I work through those things. And part of that process is just understanding. And that's probably the biggest part of that process, is understanding what are the most critical things. What are the things that are, non-starters, lines in the sand, whatever you want to call them, and what are things where, yeah, there is some flexibility within that realm to negotiate a little bit and to have somebody feel like, well, I gave a little bit here, but I get a little bit back here. And that really is the art of negotiation, right? And in the end, as you guys are well aware, Utah is growing and it will continue to grow. And if we don't accommodate for that growth in a wise and judicious and deliberative and intentional way, what we will end up doing is what's been happening. Last year, we had net in-migration greater than our native growth for the first time since the pioneers. So if we don't do something pretty significant, and significant means hard for everybody, we will end up exporting our kids and grandkids and importing others to take their place. And so when you guys in your local settings run up against people that say you're ruining my way of life, you're gonna compromise the quality of life in my neighborhood, in my area. If you do any density, it's gonna just destroy everything. The narrative needs to be flipped. That if we don't do intelligent density, the quickest way to erode and erase our quality of life is to get rid of those who we brought up with those same values, that same character, the same respect for government, for the land, for its people. We're going to get rid of all of them. We're going to send them to Texas and Nevada and Wyoming and wherever they go. And then we will import people that don't bring that same set of values or ingrained sort of character that I think is developed in Utah with our Utah kids. So when you run into those issues, flip that script, because that is really, to me, the most critical distinction that we can make is not that we have to do density everywhere and it has to be whatever we want and developers can do anything they want. That's not the point. The point is to say we need to do it intelligently, but we need to not just say never, 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 never. We have to say, okay, where does it make sense? How does it make sense? What would make this work? Mill Creek has, I think, a textbook example of redeveloping a developed area. And it's going to be amazing. And they've worked with Wasatch Front Regional Council on planning, and they've done a great job. That opportunity is what we hope to provide to all of the league members over the next few years to create those areas of intentional density and intentional planning so that your communities can feel this is an additive thing and not a subtractive. And that's the point that we want to try to get across, is that this has to be an additive benefit to your communities so that their kids can live there. So that your grandkids can live there and they don't have to go away or stay in your basement forever. That's the other bad result to this. We're not even talking ADUs, we're just talking basement. So anyways, Cameron, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like me to cover. I mean, there's a lot of detail to this. We've been working in the, we're in the thick of the weeds right now. It's sometimes hard to see out of the forest because there's a lot of trees around. But we have some really good partners that we're working with. You've got great representation here with Cameron and your executive committee. And I'm very, very optimistic that at the end of this process, you're going to be able to say, you know what, this is a good deal. And the developer is going to be able to say, this is a good deal. And the government is going to say, the state government is going to say, this is a good deal. And everybody will have won some and everybody will have lost some. But in the end, we'll find that balance. And I'm super optimistic that we're really close to that now.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any general questions, recognizing that you see the good representative's name up on the screen a lot? We don't have language, public language yet for any of those three bills. We're close, and league staff has reviewed language within all three bills, but we don't quite have public language yet for you to consider. So our plan of attack, knowing that you have a 3-day weekend coming this upcoming weekend, and what better way to spend it than to read legislation in anticipation of next week's policy committee? Am I right?
Oh, yeah. 80 pages of pure joy, each one of those.
That's right.
It's so nice to have, think about a whole extra day to be able to do that.
Yeah,
Right. But the representative chuckles about 80 pages. The current draft version of the Commission on Housing Affordability Bill is legitimately 80 pages. The other two, I hope, won't be 80 pages. But nevertheless, we don't have anything yet for you to vote on today. But we wanted to have Representative Waldrop come frame what we've been discussing to set it up for you so that when the language does come out, ideally this week, you've got this in the background as you're reading those bills to be prepared to vote next week. So any just general high-level questions for the good representative? I'm looking at your constituents in Ogden.
So I just want to, this is kind of a amorphous discussion, but it relates to housing. And I just want our membership to know, first of all, how cooperative Representative Waldrop has been in trying to recognize our concerns about some of the proposals that have been circulated out there. But we are trying to get to a position where we can support a bill because it's in our interest to do that with the legislature. And it's also in our interest for our communities to make sure that we adapt to this growth that we're facing. We're kind of, framing this around some principles that you've all heard about before, but the S Bill 34 plus we're hoping for a bill that will actually, increase the accountability that our local governments have with respect to their housing plans. And not only are we checking boxes about, our city, my city's doing A, B, and C to satisfy that affordable housing requirement, but there can be some additional data collection that gets to workforce services so that we are actually dealing on the basis of sound data and not anecdotes. That's one of the things I think that we have been able to agree upon. There are going to be some other things on here that come out. There's going to be some requirements for municipalities to do station area planning if you have a fixed guideway in your city, which fixed guideway is either rail or BRT, something, a transit mechanism that stays in the same place and isn't a bus, basically. Might also apply to hubs where 4 or more bus routes come together. That's another concept we've been bouncing around there. But the goals that we've been trying to strive for are to preserve, move the needle with respect to getting more housing built, but also recognizing individual differences among communities. Some stations are ready to develop right away. Others are going to be down the road some, and we need to have some flexibility with respect to how we spend money and what requirements we put on our communities to be able to get that done in a reasonable time frame. But get it done, right? Not let us be slackers, but to get it done in a logical way that doesn't overload our planning agencies and our staffs. So we've been working on those things. There are going to be some things, as Representative Waldrop said, I think that we will look at it and say, that's a tough thing to swallow. But on the other hand, we're hoping that by compromise that we can get the development community to also do that, and the legislature to also recognize that we're trying to do this. Representative Waldrop mentioned Mill Creek. We went on a little field trip last week where I could show him what my community is trying to do to address growth. And there are stories like this all over our state. But anyway, our best thing here would be work with the legislature as a partnership. That's what we're striving to do. And kudos to you, Representative, for being open to that approach.
Yes, Councilwoman Dominguez from Murray City. What are you talked about some of the non-negotiating, non-starters. What are some of those non-starters for you? So we can kind of, just some examples.
I don't have any. I mean, I'm not bringing any of my very limited knowledge to this discussion. The non-starters come from the other participants. They come from the league and saying, hey, well, one of the non-starters we can talk about is, hey, the state's going to come in and take over zoning. That's not what I want to do. Again, I don't want to do this job, your job. We shouldn't be doing that job. We should give you the tools that you need to succeed. We should give you the principles you need to succeed, and then turn it over to you so that you and your peers, again, like we do on the regional transportation master plan, we work together to develop this thing, and it serves a region and a regional purpose. It's not just everybody looking at their little slice of the pie. We're looking at the whole pie and saying, okay, what makes the most sense here? So that's the same process I think we want to get to, something that allows us to look beyond our own borders, but still retain control of that process within those borders, because you're responsible to your voters. I mean, my whole goal is to not have the pendulum swing all the way over here. Right now, there's a housing crisis, and the West has got the most of it, right? So what's happened in Oregon, Washington, California, zoning by right across the state, duplex, quad, every lot, all of a sudden, now it's just legal. Arizona has a bipartisan plan, and I think is it 8 units per lot. 8 units per lot by right across the state, no height restrictions, by the way. So just imagine where that goes in Utah. Imagine, I mean, it's just stupefying. But that is what's happening in other states because they cannot do the hard work that we can do. And I want to emphasize that they cannot do the hard work that we can do. And we're doing that hard work, and we are going to come out with a plan that works, that does not do stupid things like upzone the entire state so that you can have a hotel tower behind your house on a cul-de-sac, a 20-foot wide right away into a cul-de-sac. I mean, it's just idiotic, right? We don't want to go there. And other states are just caving. Pressure, developer pressure, whatever, boom. And that's not where we need to end up. And I do not want that to happen. I won't let that happen as long as I'm here, I guess. When I'm not here, it's going to be up to Cam. Other questions?
Representative Sean Guzman, St. George. Thank you. I agree. We from St. George, Southern Utah, echo what Cameron said. It's been kind of a fun collaborative effort to work on the housing. I'm concerned about the station area plans in only one aspect. We do own and operate our own bus system, and we are expanding into other cities adjacent to us to help out. And we will be looking at bus rapid transit within our city because, as you know, it's spread out quite a bit. So we'll be interested to see what the station area plans will be. But we do have one unique collaboration with UDOT that you may be aware of, where we're getting money with UDOT, putting our own money in, and we'll be running what is essentially a tourist bus rapid transit system to Zion. And that is to relieve the traffic on the highways, the parking situations in Springdale, going out to Rockville and those areas there. And it's going to be electric buses. We're excited about that. We think it'll present a great view to those coming into Zion from around the world, that we're trying to be sustainable here and move people around without adding to the traffic load.
But you can imagine our sister cities in Rockville and Springdale would be very concerned if this applied to them and now they have density requirements right there at the entrance to the park. So we just want to bring that up now so that you're mindful that that might be a special carve out there so that we can use this primarily tourist-oriented transit system to help alleviate the traffic concerns and not get some opposition because it might fall under this. As far as our own bus system within our cities, we're interested in seeing what comes up, but that one we'd like a carve out for.
Excellent point. And yeah, excellent reason to support Cam's statement of one size fits none. So thank you for highlighting that. I'm looking forward to that, by the way.
Hi, I'm Natalie Pinckney, South Salt Lake. I was just wondering, in the conversations of housing and land use, are we talking about how we can also increase ownership? One of my concerns is, as we're talking about increases of population, a lot of our conversations keep leaning towards development that is most of the time leased. And I really get scared for, young professionals like myself who want to stay in the city and grow a family if we're going to increase ownership as well. Thank you.
Excellent point. Fast forward 40 years. And 60 to 70% of our population has not had the opportunity to own real estate, to build wealth that way. What is our society going to look like when those people start retiring? They don't have wealth created within their real estate, which is the number one vehicle. Who are they going to look to support them and take them through their golden years? Good old Uncle Sam and good old Uncle Utah. I don't know, Aunt Utah maybe. I don't know who that is. We need to come up with something. Can you guys work on that? Because that's something we need. That's an extremely important point in this entire discussion is, and really, I think that falls back onto individual cities to say, as developments come in, and again, we talked through it with Mill Creek, they said they worked with developers to create ownership opportunities within those units. And it's tough right now because the apartment market is, but you can build in sunsets where you say, look, you can lease it for 10 years and then you have to put it up for sale. There are options there. And I encourage you to work that together. We can do incentives. I don't want to come in with ownership mandates because I don't even know how we would do that. But that is going to be a concern and hopefully we can address that on the local and regional levels as you approve developments. Hey, if we recognize that these are apartments right now, we want them to become condominiumized in 10, 15 years, something like that, so that we're providing that entry-level housing in the market. Or saying, yeah, you can have 200 units here, but 50 of them have to be for sale. There are ways to approach that I think are absolutely critical. And for the cities, obviously, much better for you to have residents than renters. So it's in your own self-interest to take that directive and initiative in that, because we're in big trouble if we don't solve this. Thank you.
Representative Waldrop, in addition to the people out here, we had over 100 people online. So thank you again for your willingness to bring people together and to try to move the needle in a very positive and collaborative way. I want to echo something and emphasize something that he said about, it was the answer to Councilmember Dominguez's question about what his lines in the sand are. It's actually been very refreshing sitting down in negotiations, knowing that he's not coming in saying, this is my line in the sand or this is my must-have. Essentially, the mantra has been, we have to do hard things. We need to bring people together. We need to figure out win-win solutions. And that's been the starting point and at this point, I probably shouldn't say it's the midpoint because we still have 3 weeks to go, but wherever we are in this journey, those have been the key principles. So thank you, Representative, and we'll chat soon.
I think there are some must-haves. I think the must-haves are more housing, more affordable housing, and those are our challenges. So anyway, thank you, Representative. I guess I got to look here to find my agenda. What's up next? We kind of took that out of order, I guess. Do we need to talk about?
Let's do public safety.
All right, public safety. So You want to take that?
No, Rachel.
Rachel, okay, where's Rachel? Yeah.
Oh, yes. I don't think we have the bill number yet, do we? But it's, well, I think we've told you this for a while, but it's coming. It is definitely coming. We've been assured it's coming. And what it'll include language about moving Garrity statements as protected documents. This is something that Cameron and law enforcement have been working on for a while, and so we're excited that this is moving forward. There are a couple of additional amendments at the media's request about jurisdiction and about, you appeal to the Supreme Court rather than Court of Appeals, and that they get court costs. They already get attorney's fees. And you're welcome to ask me questions about those jurisdictional pieces, but the big part that we really care about is Garrity, and we're excited that it's moving forward. And once we have the bill number, then the next step is to really demonstrate our support for this bill. There will be some opposition. There was an op-ed in the Trib today. You're welcome to take a look at that. So we will send you information about the bill and how you can support us in getting this through the session.
Okay. Next.
We've put the names on the screen of the individuals in House law enforcement. So look now, if you see that one of these members represents your city, be ready to contact them to urge support. Last night, Representative Wilcox texted me during the Super Bowl to say, call me after the Super Bowl so that we could talk through the timing of when it will be in committee. He was just waiting for it to get approved. He was hoping that would be done today. But if it's not today, it'll be tomorrow, but it'll be coming quickly. We're at the point in the session now with 13 and a half business days to go, where there are multiple committee hearings on every day. Law enforcement this week alone will meet 3 times. So things will move quickly. So we're just waiting for that final language with the bill number. Then you'll get talking points. We'll need to ensure that the committee is supportive and then shepherd this bill through the process. The other issue on public safety was SB 190. This is a bill to address the concern that we have brought to Senator Vickers now for over a year, and that is the status of individuals who are first responders, who have that higher level of a duty of care to the public, and what they are permitted to, when they are permitted to use medical cannabis on the job or in the hours preceding the job. So SB 190 came out last week, and it authorizes governmental entities to restrict the use of medical cannabis for 12 hours preceding a shift or during a shift for certain first responders. So that bill is going to be in committee tomorrow. We're very supportive of that. Again, this was something we tried to do last year during the legislative session. Senator Vickers wasn't ready to address it last year, but does have it in this year's SB 190. It's part of a much larger medical cannabis bill. So we're really focused on this piece. If you ask about other aspects of the medical cannabis bill, a lot of it doesn't apply to cities, but that piece does, and that piece is critical. So when you ratify positions this afternoon, that'll be to support that bill, and then we'll be supporting it in committee tomorrow afternoon, or tomorrow morning, actually. So any questions about either the Garrity bill or SB 190? Councilmember Sheldon.
Hi, Cam. I apologize if I'm asking a question that others have already asked, but I don't recall. Are there restrictions on use of other drugs that could impair an individual's ability to perform their work, opioids, for example?
Are you talking in state law or in local policy? Or even the bill? So well, let me answer the last piece of the bill. When voters endorsed the medical marijuana initiative several years ago, there's a provision in there that's unique to the state of Utah, where it preempted the ability of public entities to do exactly what I'm describing, of regulating the use of medical cannabis while on the job, particularly for these first responders who have this higher level of a duty of care to the public. So what this language does is addresses that unique piece in our law. If you look at medical cannabis law around the country, a lot of the medical cannabis law around the country already has this type of provision. Ours did not when the voters approved that initiative. So this addresses that piece. In terms of regulating other opioids on the job, I don't have a great answer for you. My understanding is that that's more determined by local policy, but local policy is preempted by the current medical cannabis language that voters approved. I'm looking around to see if anybody else wants to add to that. Okay, perfect. Okay. So I'm Representative Waldrop, obviously hit this at a high level. So the 30-second version is stay tuned. The bills are coming in all three spaces. We did have that standalone station area plan call a couple of weeks ago. We had over 70 people on that call. We will be sitting down with the Property Rights Coalition later this week to be negotiating on the different concepts there. But thank you to everyone who provided feedback about the station area plan concept. Likewise, with the Commission on Housing Affordability SB 34 bill, Christine Oliver was here a moment ago, and she's still there. But Christina has been a tremendous resource as we've been working through the existing data collection and the gaps therein, and how to improve that under SB 34 and under SB 34 plus. And so there will be more than just the SB 34 plus components in this bill. As soon as it's out, you'll have a one-page summary, and we'll plan to vote on it next week. That being said, the League Board did give us general direction in January when the Commission on Housing Affordability voted on the direction of the bill. We took that direction to the League Board. So for now, we're operating under the direction that the League Board gave us in January.
And maybe I'll just add about that. What the League Board was concerned about in our discussion was that we're legislating by anecdote, and that the reporting that we're required to do under SB 34, the original one should provide some data that should inform our policy in this area. And we're hoping for some improvements. Not only we're hoping for improvements, frankly, in workforce services, actually, analyzing data and using it, because I think they're behind on that. But additionally, these provisions may put some more burden on our planning staffs and municipalities and counties to provide the information. But I think in the long run, that burden will be outweighed by the benefit that we get with respect to actually knowing what we're doing and what kind of progress are we making on affordable housing through the elections that we make, and our community is actually implementing zoning to follow through with what they've committed to do with the checking the boxes. So anyway, I think, while we're sensitive about not putting additional burden on our communities, I think in order to meet the challenge that the legislature is presenting and to counter the idea that we're not doing anything on housing, that getting that data is important. So it's a burden that's worthwhile undertaking, I guess is what I'm saying.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to introduce Christine Oliver, who's the Housing and Community Development Director at DWS, to just take a moment to discuss some of those finer points of SB 34 plus and what we're trying to accomplish. If I've spent more time with Representative Waldrop this session than any legislator, I've definitely spent more time with Christina than any other state staffer over the course of the last few weeks. So thank you for all of the work and collaboration to date. So Christina.
Hi, nice to meet all of you. So a lot of you I've worked with in the different roles that I've had in this state. But just to give a little bit more context as to how we're going to change that reporting requirement. I was a community development director. I filled out that report myself and looked at the data and thought, what does this mean? And I will tell you, unfortunately, the numbers that your community development staff and planners have been utilizing are not accurate. So we are in Waldrop's bill, one of the, Representative Waldrop's bill, one of the asks is for a database. We're looking for funding to actually create a system where you can rely on the data. We're not just looking at city boundaries, we're looking at the regions. Our boundaries are relatively arbitrary in today's terms. So we want to ensure that we're providing data for the legislature, for all of you to make informed decisions. That being said, we're going to change the report. So take the report that you've been giving us for the past 3 years, and I'm tossing it in the garbage. What I've done is I've cataloged everything from 2019 to 2021. So I do have a database or a report, if you will, of what's been reported. It's not very helpful, and it isn't useful for the legislature. It isn't useful for you to look at your counterparts to see what they're doing. So this database will inform the reporting, as will a group that Cam's going to put together after the session, and we're going to create the report together. So it's not going to be in a black box anymore. It's not how I operate as long as I'm in my office, which who knows, I'm appointed as well. We'll be working collaboratively together and we'll be ensuring that the material that we're promoting to the legislature is both accurate and well-informed. You'll also be having, you'll get the opportunity to review what we're providing to the legislature before we provide it. I believe in iterative processes, so that's what we're gonna do. I hope it's helpful.
Perfect. Thank you, Christine. And let me just give an example that I think helps illustrate some of the disconnects that we have. Often legislation is driven by anecdote. The data that currently exists at the state level that often drives this discussion doesn't take into account that a city like Saratoga Springs behind me has 18,000 plus entitled units. Okay, so the number's even bigger than when you sent it to me a couple months ago. And that's the point, is that this is very fluid. You said 24,000 now? Yeah, so 24,000 entitled units. So the data, for example, that we focus on and legislature focus on, this is from the Gardner Policy Institute. And you can see the growth in housing. We put this in Friday Facts, but you can see the growth in housing just since 2017 in the state of Utah. Far right, in 2021, it was a record-setting year, nearly 40,000 building permits that local governments issued for new housing, okay? Nearly 40,000. We've never come close to that number before in state history. And the previous state record was in 2020, and you can see that 2021 shattered the record in 2020. But that number still doesn't take into account the 24,000 entitled units in one city alone. So this is part of the effort to make sure we have a more robust data set. So then as we're talking about state policy and you talk about incentives or potentially talk about penalties for cities that aren't doing their part to plan for housing, not build housing, cities don't build housing, but to plan for a variety of housing types, that we're all using consistent and accurate data. This graph, the Gardner Policy Institute from their Ivory Boyer database was released last week. So this is hot off the virtual presses and was in Friday Facts on Friday. If you do nothing else after this meeting today, both in person and online, we will send this out in today's email. We send it in Friday Facts. Share this data with your legislators today so that they know what's happening on the ground right now based on the limited data sets that exist. Nearly 40,000. Now, that being said, despite the nearly 40,000, we still have a housing gap. We still have a shortage of low-income housing. Housing prices are still going up. Labor, we still have a labor shortage. We still have material challenges with supply chains. So this is just one piece of a complicated puzzle, but it's important that you share this piece of that puzzle. Any final questions on the housing front before we pivot? Mayor, hold on. We need a microphone. We've got 100 plus on the line though, so they have to be able to hear you. Yep. So Liam's bringing you the mic.
No, in our legislative review, at our city council meeting, there was some talk about ADUs and licensing of ADUs, and that the state may prohibit municipalities from actually licensing those. If the answer is yes, then I have a follow on. If it's no, I'll just sit down.
Let's put it this way. Our official position is that internal ADUs and external ADUs should both have business licenses and should be up to the city to require those licenses or not. That's been a point of contention in the negotiations over SB 34 plus, but we've made it clear that we think those should still have business licenses. So stay tuned to see what comes in the bill.
Yeah, I mean, from our standpoint in Holiday, obviously that's probably the main tool we have to actually bring more affordable housing online. And if we can't count them, that becomes real problematic for us. But we also have life safety concerns and just a final comment. We're not using this as a way to raise revenue. They'll be I think it's $25 a year. We just want to know where they are, that they're safe, and that we can also count them and report it to the state to say, we are trying to do our best in a unique environment to bring as much of this affordable housing online. And that's probably our number one option. So we would have a concern.
So thanks, Mayor. So, I mean, that has been, those very concerns are things that we've spoken about with Representative Waldrop, and I think that he's at least attentive to that, or agrees with what you just said. We have a role to play with respect to ensuring life safety, and there may be limits in terms of how far that goes, but in terms of actually emergency egress out of an ADU, particularly in a basement, that's something that we should be able, we need to be able to require that, or there's going to be liability later. So that licensing is actually a way to keep track of that, and to also be able to enforce it. So we are fighting for that, and I frankly am hopeful that those concepts are common ground with the conversations we've had.
Yep. Amen, Mayor and Mayor. Okay, final questions on housing. Going once. Final questions on housing going twice. Plenty of questions on housing still to come over the next 13 and a half business days. So we'll move on for now. Christina, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your collaboration. And let's rock and roll. Next, I'm going to pivot to retail incentives. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. Perfect. Okay. So here's where we are on House Bill 151. We spent a lot of time on this last week. My goal is to now do this in 5 minutes today. Clock out. So, as a reminder, the League Board, beginning of January, provided us a motion which then set our negotiation framework. And I've actually put that, well, I thought I put the motion on the screen. All right, here comes the 20-something to put the motion back on the screen. I know I got to play the I am old card, right? That's an unfortunate experience. Okay, so this was the motion that the League Board endorsed in our public meeting in January. These were the 7 points. And the good news is that the substitute, now this is not a public sub, this is an internal sub right now, but the internal sub has made progress from where we were at the beginning of January on all 7 of those points. Okay, so that's the first and most important piece here, is to frame that, or better put, 6 of the 7 because of the SB 34 piece. But I think that's going to be a longer term conversation as opposed to this session. Then, in an effort to try to simplify my beautiful chart from last week, which apparently had too many colors and too many fonts and other things, I've now tried to simplify it down to here's where we are at. I asked for a straw poll last week, which was incredibly helpful. You raised your hands on 8 different questions. We went back that afternoon, met with Representative Schultz, walked through each of the 8 points. We had the data from the folks online as well as the people in the room. And because of that, the substitute, which again is not yet public, but the substitute makes some progress in those spaces. So I've now broken it down into 3 categories. This is where I hope I don't lose the room there, Silvestrini. Number 1, categories of just general policy improvements. Those are those top 3 items. So counties are the 4th, 5th, and 6th class. The previous version was just 5th and 6th. Second, that there would be a threshold of when the prohibitions would come in. We had sought 30,000. The sub is going to have it at 20,000 for a standalone facility. And then the definition of public funds is narrowed from all public funds to property and sales taxes. Okay. The second category is what I'm referring to as the technical category. The technical category is where there are 3 policy items in the version of the bill. And actually all 3 of these are in the public version of the bill, where we just don't think the definition does what the representative wants it to do. So first is the issue of equity. We talked about this briefly in our meeting last week, that the definition of equity in the bill doesn't align with the federal definition. And we're trying to have that consistency for low-income areas so that you've got that clarity between federal law and state law. The second, so that was the second technical piece. The first technical piece is the system improvements / public infrastructure. This is where we've had the most support within our membership. The substitute will include structured parking as an allowable use for incentives. There's just a question on the definition because it ties back to the Impact Fees Act, and some cities don't impose impact fees. And so we don't want to inadvertently close them off from being able to use the infrastructure exception if they don't use impact fees because of the definition. And then the third technical piece deals with what the bill now terms as a local Main Street program. Well, there are actually state Main Street programs that cities utilize for historic preservation that based on this definition, they'd no longer be able to use the state program for this exact type of purpose. So again, we think these are technical points, not policy differences, and we're just trying to hammer out the technical agreement. Okay, 2 categories down, 1 to go. The 1 to go is the trickier one. Any questions about category 1 or category 2? Maybe I did simplify this, Mayor, in my, I finished this at 12:02, just as LPC was starting. Okay, the third piece is kind of the remaining policy issues based on the straw poll last week. The good news is the substitute will remove the cause of action. That's a line in the sand issue for us. The unsure news, because I'm not sure if it's bad news, but I'm not sure if it's good news, so we're putting it in the unsure category, is that as we had recommended, all cities that use retail incentives would have to submit a report to GOEO or Go Utah. But then Go Utah can actually review those reports and withhold state transportation funding if a city is found to be in violation of the law. And recognizing we've got some ambiguities in the definitions, you could put a city in a position where they potentially forfeit state transportation dollars if Go Utah thinks they're not complying, even though the definition may be ambiguous. So that piece is a little tricky. The second policy issue is actually new language that came into the sub, which would preclude a city from being able to amend an existing RDA, CRA, or agreement. Right now, the grandfather clause just says you can't create a new one as of July 1, but this would say you can't create a new one or amend an existing one. So that was a surprise in the sub. The third piece is the housing exception within the mixed use. We had recommended a simple formula of 1 unit for every 2,000 square feet. This sub would be 1 unit for every 1,000 square feet. And then where it gets even trickier is it still has the language that Isaac brought up last week, which is it would require more than 50% to be aligned with a moderate income housing plan, which is a pretty high threshold for inclusionary housing, but would then preclude the ability of the city to use the incentive to help with the construction or maintenance of the housing or preservation of housing, as the case may be. So it just seems really inconsistent there that, yes, we want to have inclusionary housing in these developments, but we're not going to allow you to use the tool to keep those units affordable, because that is a primary tool that cities and RDAs will use for inclusionary housing. The fourth piece, and I want to be crystal clear about this one, we have tried every which way on the adjacent housing conversation. And this is a line in the sand issue for Representative Schultz. And that is saying that you should get some consideration for housing that may be adjacent to the area that is seeking retail incentives. That is an absolute non-starter. Then the last policy issue is the redevelopment piece. Both the adjacent housing and the redevelopment scored pretty high in our straw polls last week. With the redevelopment piece, you can use retail incentives under the sub for demolition and for environmental purposes if the environmental costs exceed the property value. But we've received countless examples of where the environmental cost is prohibitive for that property to redevelop, but it's not over that threshold of being more than the property value. So that's a piece where at this point as staff, we may just need to say, we can't make any movement on using development impediments, but if we can get the environmental piece right, that's the reason that RDAs were created in the first place, was to overcome these sorts of environmental challenges. So this is where we are at. Any questions about the somewhat simplified table?
This is John Hiskey from Taylorsville. Just to look at this and where we began, umpteen weeks ago, I mean, it was just literally black and white, no.
Right.
And that's coming from leadership, obviously in the House. To see what has happened here, really commend the hours and dedications put forward. And also, even though we may differ with him on other things, Representative Schultz being willing to talk about these. But in a nuanced way, it appears to me that we have made improvements that are, is significant overstated. They're substantive, and there is an area of not crossing. So my nuanced sense is, are you seeing that as a negotiator? Is that a fair question to you?
Yeah, well, in fact, going back to my overly complicated initial chart, basically everything that is highlighted here is everything that has come into the bill that wasn't there initially. So you have all of those items plus what we've been negotiating over these last few weeks, which is in part why the representative has indicated that he's basically at his last offer as we've been going back and forth. So then the question becomes, recognizing that we have these 3 tech issues that I'm hopeful that we can just get to a technical resolution on those, because there's really not a policy difference, it's just a technical difference. We still have these remaining policy pieces. The housing exception on the adjacent housing, I don't know how to crack that nut. That's a line in the sand issue for the representative. The other 4 policy issues I've laid out where I think there actually could be a way to either thread the needle or to get better clarity on the moderate income housing piece so that it's actually a workable standard that will result in more housing units. Because the last thing you want is a housing exception that doesn't actually result in more housing units. So, our recommendation in light of what we've laid out to you here would be that if we can kind of get into this space, kind of what's outlined in the second column and the third column, and we can get to enough of those pieces that then that the league would actually vote to go neutral if we can get there on those pieces. But that's what we wanted to present to you for consideration. So Carson, you've got something online. Then Mayor Ramsey, is there anything that you want to add? Okay, so Mayor Silverstein, you go first, then we'll have Carson ask.
Yeah, so maybe I'll be stealing Mayor Ramsey's thunder, but the representative has been asking the league to go to neutral on this bill and has.
He's actually asking for support.
So, yeah, well, he'd like support, but at minimum neutrality. And there's a significant risk to us if we don't do that, if we don't get to something that we can go neutral on or support. I'm not sure we'll get that there, but is that this bill turns into a more punitive, it reverts into a more punitive measure. A lot of these things that we have been working hard to negotiate are I think, concessions that may have been premised on the idea that we'll maybe get to neutral. So, in fact, I think we've had the express threat of it going worse if we don't. So that's just something to factor in. This is not something that any of us, I think, would like to agree to just by itself. But it's one of those things where we really are having to appreciate the consequences of not doing that. Is that fair, Mayor?
Carson, questions online?
From Paul Larson, what is the effective date and is this retroactive in the substitute?
It is not retroactive, but the effective date would be July 1 for entering into a new or amending an existing. So that's why I bring up that new language on that policy issue of the grandfather clause, is that amending language could be really problematic because you amend RDAs all the time or CRAs all the time.
Thanks.
The other thing I'll point out on the grandfathering piece is I'm aware of other specific projects and proposals around the state. And there's also been a question of the timing of if you actually have to sign on the dotted line or just initiate the agreement, because we don't want is a situation where other taxing entities are incentivized to just run out the clock and not sign on to a contract before July 1. Instead, you want to be able to say, no, if we've initiated and we as a city have done everything we can control, that those would be grandfathered in as well. Councilmember?
And someone asked this online. I'm kind of going back and forth, but Rosalba from Murray City. In the language for Main Street programs, could it be added as downtown revitalization to include?
Yep, I think so. What I've listed there as clarity is trying to basically express exactly that, of what is it that the local Main Street program is trying to accomplish, and let's make sure that the state is not precluding those from being accomplished.
Hey, thanks, everyone. I just wanted to thank everyone for all of your input up to this point. We've had about a zillion board meetings and LPC meetings where we've really tried to take all the input of all the concerns of the very different communities across the state and work them into this. If you'll recall, this started as a one-sentence bill, no retail tax incentives, period. And that was really the strong desire. And I mean, it's just been so many months. I think August, we started working on this. I think it was August. Nonstop, trying to take all the input. We appreciate the input and the feedback. And I'm going to turn around to my friends back here too and say thank you for all the input and the feedback. We have not been able to quite get everything we want. Means this bill doesn't exist, right? Okay, so that being said, I have to express appreciation to everyone who has weighed in and given your input. We have tried really hard to use your specific examples, all the various specific examples of why these considerations need to be made. And I do appreciate, as challenging as this has been, the willingness of the teams from Go Utah and from Representative Schultz to be willing to come to the table and to negotiate this. Early on, I don't know that I felt like we would maybe even get nearly as much progress as we've been able to make. That said, it's not perfect and there's still a few things to work on. But I also want to thank the team, this whole team, Cameron and his team, the board. I want to thank everybody who's worked on this. It's been a lot. I'm just going to echo what's been said. I really do think that we need to try to continue on these final nuanced pieces and do what we can to try to get to neutral, because it's been a hard fought battle to get to this point. And I would hate to see any of us lose the progress that we've made, because what might not affect your city might really affect somebody else's if it's changed. And I do think this is the best we're going to get. Sincerely, I do. I think it's final offer. He's done negotiating. This is going before a committee. It's going to happen whether we like it or not. This is going to pass. It's going to pass in the House. And I just think we need to get there if we want it to continue to work in our favor with everything that we've all tried to make happen with this.
So our staff recommendation would be if we can fix the technical pieces and make some final improvements in those policy spaces that we've listed on the screen here, that then our official position would be neutral. That's our recommendation. We would welcome that being formalized, just so we can go back, because I have a meeting with Representative Schultz this afternoon. It's my standing Monday afternoon meeting with Representative Schultz on a variety of issues. So I would like to be able to go back and say, yes, we can go to neutral if we are able to make progress on these pieces, recognizing he may say no, in which case we would still be trying to make these changes in House committee, on the House floor, or in the Senate. So now's the time to make sure we've got clear direction from this group. If you think this is unacceptable, say so now, because it's sink or swim time. So I saw a hand over here as well. So let's go Mayor first.
Mayor Overson, and I appreciate all of the work, the detailed explanation, and I am ready to, do you want this in the form of a motion?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful.
To move forward, working as you can so that we can get to a neutral position on this.
So basically, Mayor, your motion is that the league would move to neutral if we can accomplish these things that Cameron's described in the negotiations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a second for that? And Mayor Burton, you had a comment too. Maybe you want.
My comment was the same as Mayor Overson's. I was going to make the motion, but she is so good, she beat me to it. So I'll second her motion since she did such a fantastic job.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for the league to move to neutral if we can get these concessions on these last points. Is there further discussion to that motion? Seeing none, then all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, you got your marching orders.
Perfect. Okay, speaking of changing a position from opposed to neutral, let's take the numbers 151 and play a game with them. Now we're going to talk about SB 115. That's the homelessness and firearms preemption bill. Now, I know you're thinking, well, how is it homelessness and firearm preemption? It's actually a firearm preemption bill. But we've raised the concern that the scope of the original version of the bill would preclude and preempt a city's ability to regulate a homeless resource center, to keep a homeless resource center weapons free. So I don't actually have a slide for this one, but just know that we have been working behind the scenes tirelessly on this issue. Evelyn had actually asked for an update on this bill, I think 2 LPCs ago, which is why I wanted to bring it back up. We, in addition to the homelessness piece, we also testified in committee about the impact of the original version of the bill on performing arts venues when an artist, let's pick one everybody loves, like Hamilton, wants to come to the Echoes Theater and wants to have a weapons-free facility. And the original version of the bill would have preempted that contractual arrangement. So we've had multiple meetings with NRA representatives, with the bill sponsor and other legislators, trying to make progress on addressing those two pieces. When I testified in committee, I started my comments by saying the League is supportive of the Second Amendment. I ended my comments by saying the League is supportive of the Second Amendment. Nevertheless, I was accused later, actually grabbed by somebody saying, why do you hate the Second Amendment? If you try to take my guns, I'm coming for you. That happened in the rotunda, quite the moment. So to be clear, the League is supportive of the Second Amendment. The two issues we were working on were the performing arts venues and homeless resource centers. So we don't have a public sub yet, but we have been working with the bill sponsors and I'm cautiously optimistic we're going to get to resolution on this piece. So any questions about SB 115? For those listening online, Sean Guzman asked, what if the musical is Annie Get Your Gun? Yeah, Annie, yes, Annie could. There would be an exception to the exception. Okay, the other homeless piece, and this matters to everybody, but particularly the cities that house homeless resource centers, is we are still awaiting Representative Elison's comprehensive homelessness bill that he runs every session. This bill will include potential changes to the homelessness mitigation fund that we have been negotiating now for months with Wayne Niederhauser. I should also point out for the cities that house homeless resource centers, that Wayne Niederhauser has been a champion as we've been trying to work through SB 115. So I've met with him multiple times on the firearm preemption issue for the homeless resource centers, and he's been terrific at raising that concern all the way up to the highest levels of House and Senate leadership. We've also been working very closely with his team. Molly Wheeler, our policy director, has been working with the cities that have homeless resource centers and with Wayne's team to figure out what the formula ought to be and if there should be state dollars that go into the homelessness mitigation fund. We were hoping we'd have a bill today for your consideration. Still not numbered, still not out. So as you can see, next week's LPC is going to have a lot of really big ticket items that just aren't ready for prime time yet today. Any questions on homelessness? Okay. So Mayor, I know we're past 1:30, but Justin has
Yeah.
just a few quick updates, so you
has
can
some
do that.
updates and- Yeah.
Okay. So
Well,
those,
while you're coming up here too, I just want to point out, to go to the appropriations update. I guess the league in partnership with Wasatch Front Regional Council and MAG have been asking for appropriation with respect to some planning money and some money to help educate our residents about the growth challenges that we face. And those matters moved through the appropriations subcommittee, and basically the funding for the planning stuff was cut from what we had asked for. So we're not satisfied with that, because especially with the additional mandates that we're going to be seeing coming through SB 34 plus and possibly other things, our municipalities, particularly those who may not have the resources to do some of the technical stuff and planning that needs to be done, will benefit from this kind of an appropriation. So Mayor Ramsey, as president of the league, and me as chair of Wasatch Front Regional Council will be sending a letter to the Executive Appropriations Committee and trying to lobby the members of that committee to basically put that money back into the appropriation so that we get adequate money for planning. I'm not sure that's even enough, but at least it's better than what we've had. So, Andrew.
I was just going to
suggest that Mayor Silvestrini remind everybody also that that was unanimously recommended, those planning funds by the
Governor's
Economic
Office of Planning
Opportunity
and Budget.
Commission.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
also the governor as a recommendation in his budget through GOPB, and they've been great partners on this.
Yeah, and we are working with the governor's office on that. We've been in close communication with them as well, so.
Okay, the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to the team is, Andrew, it's very satisfying to do a ba to you with the microphone there. But more importantly than that, thank you for your involvement in the lead. We haven't sent any action alerts to date intentionally because we knew there were going to be big ticket items coming, and we were saving our action alerts for when we come down the stretch. I had a conversation the other day with somebody who was explaining a league action alert to another stakeholder. And that stakeholder said, what's a league action alert? And this person said, it's when Cam sends an email and gets all of the mayors fired up about something. And then I hear from legislators within the hour of why is the mayor so mad? So the action alerts, again, we've been saving them for the big ticket items here as we get down the stretch. And you may see some twice a day. You may see them every day. You may see them once a week. It's hard to know how all these pieces are going to fall together. We're hopeful that we get to yes on a lot of these bills. So the action alert is to support the bill. But if we need that additional push, or if there's just a bad bill and we send the action alert, it'll be absolutely vital that you follow up on those. So even though today is Valentine's Day, it's the spirit of love, it's the spirit of harmony. When you see the action alert, either love the legislators or hold them accountable about the bills that are coming before them in committee or on the floor. Last thing I'll just say is I was rocking my Utah tie in honor of Eric Weddle, who lived, I think, all of our dreams of being able to be retired one day and starting the Super Bowl the next, and then have a torn pectoral muscle the next day when reality sets in. But thank you, everybody, for being here. Happy Valentine's Day, and I'll let you guys wrap things up.
So I wanted to briefly mention two bills that should be on your radar on the eminent domain front. First is House Bill 85, and that is the eminent domain amendments bill. I've already heard from a number of league members on this, and I believe we are at a firm oppose. This bill would prohibit municipalities and any other government entity from using eminent domain to condemn property for the purpose of a park. We're currently opposed to that. If you feel strongly to the contrary, please reach out to me and let me know. The other one that just came out towards the end of last week is House Bill 357, and that is the eminent domain appraisal amendments bill. We're opposed on principle, but still exploring it. This bill would have the effect of requiring a government entity to obtain an updated appraisal within 90 days of making a final settlement offer. We're still working through exactly what the fiscal implications of that are. I know some other government entities who I've talked to are not as concerned about this bill, since they often they receive appraisals periodically, and this often works out to be around 90 days. So we're currently in oppose on that, and we'll ask you to ratify that position, but with the recognition that we'll keep working with the sponsor on that one.
Thanks, Carson. I just want to say on the eminent domain with respect to park space, that, one of the things to remind our legislators on this is, that we're being asked to increase density. We're being asked to redevelop areas and with increased density. And I don't know, some of you may remember we had at a league convention a year and a half ago, we had a presentation. It was headed by Salt Lake City about an analysis of park space across many of our communities, and it's already inadequate with respect to that. So as our population grows and we put people in more dense housing situations, the need for additional park space is apparent to all of us. And especially in areas that are already developed, if you don't have some tools to be able to address that, we'll never get the park space that our residents require. And in order to ensure continued quality of life with more density, you got to have some open space. So this bill actually flies in the face of a lot of the things that the legislature is otherwise asking us to do with respect to planning for growth.
All right, just really quick, HB 182, local health department order amendments. This bill has been subbed or will be subbed when it's in committee tomorrow. Let me say those words correctly. So it doesn't apply to any other health emergency, just the pandemic or to an epidemic. So we're still opposed to this bill just on principle, but it's in a much better place than we thought than it was previously. Lynn Pace and I just ran over in the middle of this meeting to negotiate a little bit on that. Just a heads up, there may be an amendment coming out on that bill that applies to cities. I don't know anything more than that I can say, but we may be reaching out to some people very quickly to get some input on an amendment before it's into committee tomorrow morning. So just be on the lookout for that. And Rachel, I'll have you talk ambulances.
So today marks the start of my third week with the league. And one of the topics or issues that Cam has passed on is ambulances. And one thing that I've learned is that if you want to start people's hair on fire is to talk about ambulance. I didn't know, like this wasn't a thing in my previous life, but it is now. So HB 293 is talking about overlay and overlaps. I won't get into all of it, but it was amended last week. It was passed through committee and will be going to the House soon. For those who are interested in this topic, we're going to have a meeting with our fire chiefs and other interested parties immediately following this meeting. You're welcome to stay and talk more about ambulances.
Make a motion on.
Okay. So let me just ask if there are any other policy issues that league members want to raise before we move to a consideration of a motion to approve the legislative actions that we've got in the bill tracker.
Oh, we got one behind you.
I've been getting some emails today about Senate Bill 197, Public Education Funding Amendments. It says this bill reduces the state funding contributed to a school district by the amount of tax increment that the district dedicates to an entity. This would essentially discourage a school district from participating in any future CRAs. And people are calling, getting different people saying, hey, reach out before the 4 o'clock Senate meeting. I don't know if the league has been onto this one, but I guess the city's perspective would be, in most situations to get a tax increment situation, you have to have the school district sign on. If this guts their enthusiasm for them, it's going to limit our ability to do these. So I know we're at past time, but just throw that out there because I'm getting people saying reach out, and I'm not sure if we have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, Dave, go ahead. We'll have Liam run. But yes, we have been talking about that one today, Isaac, and our thought is to oppose it for that reason.
Thank you. Isaac, thanks for bringing this up, Mayor Kafusi. I'll be surprisingly brief. 197 is in committee this afternoon, Rev and Tax Committee. We've been working on votes. We need to get a no from Bramble. I'll give that to you. We need to get a no from Cullimore, and we've worked with Sandy on that. We need to get a no from Chris Wilson, and we've worked on that with Logan and Brigham City. And we wanted a no from Ipsen, but Sean Guzman fumbled. So if the bill comes out of committee today, we can all blame Sean. But this is a horrible bill, and the answer is kill it in committee. If you did your job, you'd get him there.
Generate any more school children. They are either have to do with industrial projects, they have to do with commercial projects. And so really it helps the school district by increasing that amount. And remember, your school districts right now have the choice that it doesn't even have to be 100% in. Ours generally goes 75% in from the get-go, so they can get 25% of the increment right away from a project that is not generating more students for the schools. So just remember that if someone reaches out and talks to you, we're not doing these things for large housing projects. We're doing it for commercial, for industrial, for those types of things that do nothing but generate more money for tax revenue for the school districts.
Thank you, Sean. Okay, if there isn't anything else, then I'll look for a motion to ratify the recommended positions. Okay, I heard a motion in a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, I think we're ready to adjourn. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, so next meeting is actually on Tuesday because Monday is President's Day. So we'll be meeting at noon on Tuesday here, I guess.